So this is part 2 of Chapter 54's lecture, and we had left off speaking about interspecific relationships between species or populations in a community. And one of the final ones we need to discuss is predation. So predation is really important, especially when we look at its role in evolution, because it provides a strong selection pressure, which, when I say that, I mean natural selection pressure on both the prey and the predator. So a predator's adaptations are going to be favored or naturally selected if they help them locate and subdue prey more efficiently. So things like ability to move quickly, they tend to be agile and fast, ability to lie in ambush, use of camouflage are all adaptations that a predator is going to take full advantage of. On the other hand, prey are going to need adaptations to avoid being preyed upon. So things that allow them to elude or defend themselves. One thing I want to point out when we're talking about predation is it's not limited to just animals, because animals preying on other animals, because also natural selection is going to favor adaptations that a plant has to avoid being killed and eaten by a predator. So predation also includes plant life, animals eating primarily plants. Some behavioral defenses of prey animals include fleeing, hiding, forming herds in schools. Active self-defense is not that common, but large grazing mammals can vigorously defend their young from predators. You also have the use of alarm calls to summon many individuals of the prey species to mob the predator. Some other adaptations that prey are going to take advantage of are mechanical defenses, like a porcupine's spine, chemical defenses, like a skunk would have. There are things that we call aposematic coloration or cryptic coloration. Batesian mimicry and Müllerian mimicry are all different defense mechanisms that our prey can use to avoid being eaten. So let's look at those more closely. So the first one is the ability to hide from a predator. So cryptic coloration is the ability to have camouflage. So if you can notice over here, there's a lizard on this tree trunk. So very good camouflage is going to help prey become less or avoid detection. Other types of adaptations are things that warn the predator to advertise how undesirable you are as a prey. And that's where we get aposematic coloration. Apo comes from away, and sematic comes from a sign. So a sign to go away. And under aposematic coloration, we have the two types. We have Batesian mimicry and Müllerian mimicry. So first of all, these are some more examples of cryptic coloration, a defense mechanism that we think of as camouflage. And these are all well camouflaged species. This is a quick little video. Let's see if it will show up here. It's going to be off. There we go. You can see the seahorse that looks a lot like coral. Okay, that was very quick. Okay, let me put our box back where it's supposed to be. Okay, so after cryptic coloration, we have the types of mimicry. So we have Batesian mimicry, which is when a palatable or pleasant tasting species mimics a harmful one. So we have lots of examples of this in nature. These species gain significant protection by mimicking the appearance of another species that may be poisonous or maybe just doesn't taste good to a predator. So these are some examples of that, where we have Batesian mimicry. This is a larva of a hawk moth that puffs up to look like a poisonous snake. You can see how it does that. Here's some more examples. We have two different types of butterflies there at the top. One is poisonous, the monarch, whereas the viceroy is not poisonous, but it's got the Batesian mimicry going on, where it looks just like the poisonous monarch. So a bird will avoid eating either one of those. The top sign up there talks about convergent evolution. What that's referring to is when we have two different species evolving over time, and natural selection is favoring the adaptation in both of them. So in the case of the viceroy, for example, butterfly, it's converging to be more and more like the monarch because it's just a favorable adaptation that's going to help its survival. We also get mimicry in predators. So in the case of an octopus, for example, mimicry can be used by the predators to get closer to their prey. So octopi will mimic different types of other animals that are not dangerous to the prey. So it can mimic a sea snake, for example, or a flounder or a stingray. You see how this octopus takes on all these different shapes so that it can then get close to its prey in order to catch it. Another type of mimicry is the Müllerian mimicry, and that's just when two or more unpalatable species resemble each other. So in this case, we have a cuckoo bee and a yellow jacket, and they're both unpalatable to a predator, and they have just over time evolved to be very similar in how they look, and that's just termed Müllerian mimicry. Okay, so we have the predation and some of the different factors involved in predation. The next type of a little bit like predation is herbivory. So herbivory is a plus-minus interaction, and it refers to the type of interaction where an herbivore eats parts of a plant or algae. And it's led to evolution of plant mechanical and chemical defenses and adaptations by herbivores to make them better able to eat the plants. And this is just a picture of a West Indian manatee in Florida. It was a voracious herbivore. But some of the things that plants develop to help them not be prey to an herbivore are thorns or a bad taste, coloring that looks unpalatable. So anything that helps it not end up getting eaten is something that will be an adaptation used by plants to avoid predation. So again, here's the term convergent evolution, and that's defined as similar adaptations but have different evolutionary origins. So two different animals can look similar. So in these different cases of mimicry that we have going on, we have animals that develop the same phenotype over time, but they're not closely related from an evolutionary standpoint. They can have diverged early on and have a common ancestor way back in their lineage, so that they're not closely related, but they still evolve similar adaptations, mostly because they're occupying similar niches. And so that would also mean they have similar predators. And so they do again, natural selection is going to help those survive that have adaptations that help them not be victims of predation. So, common warning coloration, aposematic species come to resemble each other through convergent evolution. So you can see how these are all species that are unpalatable, poisonous in many cases. So predators want to stay away from them. And so that's considered aposematic coloration. And you can see how the colors are very similar. And I think it's just interesting that predators come to notice that these brightly colored reds and yellows are associated with something that's unpalatable or even dangerous to them. So there's a coral snake in this picture and a king snake. So the coral snake is poisonous and the king snake is not. And so in this case, we have Batesian mimicry because one is poisonous and one's not. But they have this banding that helps them appear similar, especially for the king snake's benefit. If it looks a lot like a poisonous snake, then it's not going to end up getting eaten as likely. And that's just something that people learn when they live around snakes like this. Red on yellow, poison fellow. Red on black, save from attack. So that we can tell the difference from this Batesian mimicry, but other predators cannot. Now we've talked about convergent evolution, but there's also what we call coevolution that occurs in a community. So when we have predator-prey relationships or parasite-host relationships, flowers and pollinators, what we have is the relationships between these different species in a community cause there to be evolution going on in both species in order to make the best of their relationships. And so what's favorable then is that the two species are going to develop in a way so that they are approaching having a plus-plus relationship or interspecific relationship or interaction. So things that are adaptations, for example, in response to each other would be an example. A predator-prey relationship, we have coevolution going on. If, for example, on the bottom there you have, it looks like a bobcat running after a hare. Coevolution would favor the hare getting faster and faster. Then also what would be favored would be adaptations in the bobcat to get faster and faster. So that is what we would call coevolution. There's pressure on both of them to evolve adaptations that make them better at whatever their relationship is. So now that we've looked at interactions, now we're going to look at just the basic structure of a community. So part of community ecology is also going to look at the structure. And when we're thinking of structure in a community, there are a few things we want to look at. One is, and probably the most important, is species diversity. How many different species are there? What is the richness of the species diversity? And that is contrasted or compared with the relative abundance of each of those species. So how many in that population or species are present is balanced with how many different types of species there are. So that's the one thing, species diversity, or what we would term biodiversity. There's also feeding relationships, so that's where we start to get into that predation relationship, for example. There's composition of the community. What is the dominant species? What is the keystone species? How is it changing over time? What type of succession is occurring? So we'll look at this very quickly, look at each of these individually. But one of the things I want to mention, you don't need to know how to calculate the Shannon Diversity Index. But what it is, just so you know, is a measurement that allows scientists to look at diversity compared to abundance in a mathematical way. So they